Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Creative Leadership Podcast. My name is Arne van Oostrom and I have an amazing guest on the show today. We're going to listen to Zahara Chetty. Zahara is she's really one of the smartest people I've ever met. She's been many things. She's been a fashion designer, an IT and physical science educator. She's been a design thinker, UXer, an innovation strategist, a foresight consultant. She's moving into futurism now. And she's the founder at African Futures Academy. So I was really honored to have her on the show and to be interviewing her. And I'm at awe with her origin story, growing up in a township in South Africa during the Apartheid regime, growing up poor, but having to be the best in class, being hypersensitive. I loved her philosophy around the consciousness evolution and her ideas around leadership. So I think it's really worth listening to her story and understanding how the way you grow up and all the things that you go through in life, specifically when you're young, when you're still a child, how this impacts you and everything you are. And this is extremely relevant for all of us. It's relevant to understand where we came from in order to understand where we're going and why we relate to people in a certain way and why we make the choices that we make. Okay, but before we go and listen to Zahara, I want to thank Matt Holt from Matt Holt Books for helping and supporting me. As you know, or at least as I have shared before, I'm writing a book about creative leadership, and this podcast is a part of that. So thank you, Matt Holt, for supporting the program. All right, let's go and listen to Zahara.
Getting to know somebody is about understanding, what makes them tick, what their spirit is about, and having deep, meaningful conversations with them. And people are, we're constantly changing all the time. You can't say, this is the definition of me, because every day you learn new things, you experience new things. So you learn and you grow and you become. And life is just an evolution of the soul, right? You're just evolving all the time. You're becoming yourself each day. So I don't think there's any point in time that you are the same, from one moment to the next. So there's a lot of things that make you are the sum of your experiences. You are basically a unique combination of DNA interacting with the environment and your memories, your perceptions, your understanding of the world, your feelings, all of that combined into one makes you who you are. And every single person is a unique combination. You'll never meet, a duplicate of yourself in the world. So it's very hard to define people, even myself.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm going to attempt to unpack that a little bit, if you let me. So you're the sum of the parts. I mean, like anyone, there's so many things that you go through in life that you take with you. So let's start at the beginning. So where were you born?
Where they came from. So the story starts basically with me knowing my grandparents. They moved during the Group Areas Act to a township called Chatsworth, where my parents were living, and they grew up, and we were also born there. So they moved when they were very, very young, about 3-4 years old. The Group Areas Act happened, and they moved into homes in Chatsworth. So you can understand the kind of context that we were born into. It was very traumatic. People were living in poverty. They were trying to, basically it was all about survival. And the society that we grew up with, it was very, they had certain patterns of behavior. People were very distant. They were very disconnected. There was a lot of strife. There was a lot of anger. And it was all about, survival. If you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it was all about survival, food, clothing, and shelter. People were worried about the jobs that they had and making sure they could provide for their families. So we were born into this kind of society. And there was a lot of, when you're in that condition, you can't actually connect with your emotions. You have to be strong. Men were especially, afflicted by this. You couldn't talk about things that were bothering you or what was happening in your lives. And there was a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse, and just people were just walking around like disconnected. So we were born into this situation where our parents were, not really connected with us. We felt really disconnected. There wasn't any emotional connection with people. And it was all about succeeding in life, right? So,
but as a child, were you aware, because you're saying you felt disconnected from your parents, but was that something you were aware of as a child? Wasn't that?
So
how did you experience that as a child?
So I think I can remember, just being a few months old, and even our parents were very busy with other things. They were working, or my mom was at home. So they got married very young, right? And there was a lot of stress. Like I said, we lived in a house with my grandparents and all her kids and all their kids. So there was like 20 of us in the same house.
Whoa.
So there are 4 different families. And it was a normal thing because that's how, the townships were created. You didn't have your own situation, and extended families were the norm. So there were about 10 kids in the yard, and all our uncles and aunts lived on the same property. And we also stayed there for about 5 years before we moved on our own. But as much as, I had my cousins to play with, our parents were very busy with other things, cooking and cleaning and washing and ironing and preparing the foods. And I think in Indian families especially, how women are treated and how they interact is very oppressive. Or, women are basically like second-class citizens, especially, in that situation where you have these daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws all living together. And it's still a problem today, right? I think there's no way it's more pronounced that in that dynamic. So even, if I was a kid and I was like, I wanted to be carried all the time, and they just never happened, so I would just be sitting there in my pram screaming and, feeling like nobody's ever going to come and pick me up. So I think I developed a very avoidant attachment style. So that means like, if I thought, nobody was going to take care of me, I would just have to do things for myself. And that's where the disconnect started, right? So I just ended up growing up thinking I had to just take care of myself, and I couldn't really connect with anyone. And we thought it was normal, right? It was all about, you had to do well in school, and there are certain rules that you had to follow. Our parents were very strict with us, especially if you were a girl. You couldn't leave the house. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't go to a friend's house. You couldn't have friends over. They were extremely, possessive of us as children. But while we were in the yard, we were free to do whatever we wanted. And we, got up to lots of mischief and things, but we were safe. We were at home. So, yeah.
And you grew up in a time where apartheid was still reality.
Yes. Yeah, so that's, where it started, growing up in this Indian township in that situation. So we didn't know exactly, how other people lived, or this was just the norm for us. We didn't even see white people or black people or colored people. And there was no social media, so you never knew what other people were going through.
All right. Because because you're in your own bubble. And if you don't go outside, so that was that was normal for you.
Yes.
Yeah, and so when did you get out of that that bubble? What happened next?
So then we moved, right? So when I started school, I was about 6 years old. My mom got a job, so she did this clerical typing course, and then she ended up getting a job in a furniture shop, and then she was out at work and I was at school, and we moved houses. So we it was just my brother, my mom, my dad, and I. And we each, basically, the disconnection was already there, right? Everybody kind of had their own lives. And I was just alone a lot of the time, because my parents were at work the whole day. They would be gone from 6 to 6. My brother was out at school. He was older than I am, and he had his friends who he would play with. And I wasn't allowed to leave the house. So it was just me by myself a lot of the time.
How old were you then?
About 6.
You were about 6. Okay. Yeah, okay. So, and this is where you, all right. So you were not allowed to go out alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of safety concerns, or just because of
they were just
habit.
Really possessive. They never let the kids stay over at other people's houses or have them over or anything like that. It was just how they raised their kids. They were very possessive. I think they had a lot of fear in them because of things that they went through when they were kids, so they were extremely possessive.
Yeah. Okay. And because when they were kids, because when your parents were kids, what was the situation then? Because they were born also in Durban, or were they? Yeah,
they were born in Durban, and they were growing up when all of these political issues were happening in South Africa, and apartheid was, they removed them forcibly from their homes and moved them into these townships, and so they were very traumatized individuals. The whole generation. And they just pass that on to the next. I guess.
Of course. Yeah. So that, because that was sort of their trauma, that you became also a part of, a victim of what they went through. And so what happened next? You're 6 years old. Your mother's working. You go to school. What happens?
So my parents were very, focused on education and doing well in school. So we were poor. I didn't know we were poor, right? Because when you're growing up, you don't really know everything's, great for you. They always made sure we had everything, right? Like I said, food, clothing, and shelter always done. But we had this thing where once a year we would get a gift, anything we wanted, right? It was during December because it was our birthdays, it was end of school, and it was Christmas time. So we could pick whatever gift we wanted, and we would only get what we wanted if we came out first in school. We had to be first in class. So
the pressure.
But it was my brother started school first, so that was the rule, and I was about 3 years old when they started doing this. So when he was learning anything, I would just copy him, and whatever he could do, I could do it, So I started learning things very early because he was already doing it. And I could just watch what another person was doing and just copy them, and then I would get it. And our parents were so excited by this. But what happened over time when I started school was that they started comparing us together. It became a competition. So, and another issue I had, I think, I don't know what combination of things led to this, but I became a highly sensitive person, right? I had sensory integration problems. So, when it came to touch, I couldn't have people hugging me or kissing me or touching me, or the clothes that I wore would itch. There's certain fabrics I couldn't wear. The labels, I had to cut them out of my clothes. I had to wear my socks inside out, and just sounds and things in the environment, I couldn't shut them down. I couldn't turn it off. So even if the clock was ticking in the house somewhere, I had to take out the battery before I go to bed because I couldn't sleep otherwise. So things other people didn't notice or couldn't pay attention to, it really affected me. It was over amplified. It was like living life in high definition, There's a constant stream of excess sensory information. And then also it also was like a lack of boundaries. I didn't know where things in the environment ended and I began. It was just constantly into my system. And that also happened with other people's emotions. So I could feel what they were feeling. So for example, my brother, if they started comparing us with a lot of things, and if he felt bad, it made me feel bad. I felt even worse that they were comparing us. So what I would do is, I would try and take myself out of the competition. And, so like whatever he was doing, I would do the opposite. If he did music, I would do art. If he was doing geography, I did computer science. Just to like not be in a space where they could compare us, head on. And that's happened with everybody, even in school. Like everybody's parents were the same, right? There was a lot of competition for school, and kids would say to me, you know what, if they don't come out first, their parents would give them a hiding, things like that. So that used to really bother me.
I can imagine.
And I could, as this hypersensitive empath, it really.
So how does this? So if you, because the first thing you were talking about was actually you were very disconnected. You felt disconnected. You were very much not connected to others, and this is like a hyper connection to everyone.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Because you were both like disconnected and connected.
Yeah. So like it's like a pendulum, right? You can swing to either way. So there's a need for connection with people, and you see everything in the world connected, from atoms to stars and the sky and human beings and the whole system. And then you have to disconnect yourself because it's too much to handle sometimes. So it's a like swinging on the pendulum from hyperconnection to complete disconnection, because you have to numb yourself. And that happened a lot through my life. I had no sense of what normal was, where the middle ground was, no sense of self. It was just like a very, very uncontrolled
so
kind
do you
of
think that pendulum, because you started with this extreme disconnect, and that's why it got this extreme kind of swing to the other side?
Yeah, the range of experience was just open. There was no boundaries, so I always felt like, I could see everything in the world completely connected, but I myself, I was disconnected because I didn't actually have a sense of self. I think because you see yourself through relationship with others. And if you don't have that, you don't know who you are or that you even exist.
Right.
And as a child, you don't see yourself. I see everybody else. So I used to feel other people's feelings. I didn't feel my own. I didn't even know I was like a thing, an entity. I always felt like, I was the observer watching everybody else living life, but I couldn't participate in it, and I felt like an alien or an outsider. And like, I was just waiting for them to come back and pick me up and take me back home to the other planet,
And how did your brother respond to this? Because of the way you were basically always choosing the opposite of what he was doing. Did he know that? Was it something you talked about? I don't think
he noticed that. We've never had an actual conversation, about anything. He actually lives in the UK. I haven't really spoken to him for many years. And even growing up, we were very close at some points, but then he also, as he grew up, he ended up, just doing his own thing. But he didn't know this was happening. To him, I was just this annoying little brat, always in his face, always doing things, tagging along wherever he went. And he's probably just annoyed with me. And I've never said that, this is what I actually used to do. But what it did is it made me able to just learn anything and do anything. And I think the pain of feeling other people's emotions was much more difficult than me being brave and doing something new.
I have one question because I'm curious about this, because you did come first in class a couple of times, I assume, because you were smart and you could learn and your brother kind of paved the way.
Yeah.
What was the present that you chose to get?
So this happened every year. We always came out first. It was both of us, right?
Oh, you always came out first. Amazing.
Yeah.
So what were the presents that you've chosen?
I would always choose something artistic, like an art set, or a copy machine or something like that. And my brother would always choose something scientific, like a microscope or, or things like that. And I would always go and say, why didn't I think of this? It's such a cool thing. So when he wasn't around, I would go in his room and play with his stuff. So I had all my artistic stuff, and then I also played with all his scientific, really, interesting stuff. And the difference between us was he always knew, what he liked and what he wanted to do and who he was. He would call himself a professor, and now he basically is one. So he had a very distinct sense of self and who he was, and he was also like the perfect child. So it didn't make it any easier. Anything my parents told him to do, he would listen. He would be compliant. And he studied hard, he worked hard, he was very disciplined, and I was the complete opposite.
And but you did come in first, and you did, you were good at school, and so your parents must have been at least satisfied with the results.
So we had this wall of trophies, right? So every year we would collect awards from school, and my parents would parade it up like it was, some display cabinet. And it was the first thing you saw when you walked into our house. There's rows and rows of trophies, and that's like all we were to them. Something to talk about, to tell your friends, this is what my kids could do. This is how brilliant they are. And I hated it because they never knew who I was. They never had a conversation with me to know what I was like. My brother was very hardworking and systematic and disciplined, and he studied. And I never studied. I never read a book. I never learned, sat and read anything. I was too impatient for that, but it just came easily to me. So I didn't feel a sense of accomplishment. Like I never had to try to get these things, so.
Yeah. Okay. Then what happened? So this is where when you were at school, this is primary school, and then you went to, what do you do next? What happened next?
Yeah, so I think my brother was always an influence on me, right? So whatever books he would be reading, he would tell me about it, and just kind of, he'd read a lot of things that just expanded your thinking. And like, for example, he read the book The Time Machine by H.G. Wells and by Bazaar Hands and things like that. So we just, we would have these conversations about what was possible in the world and all kinds of random things. I mean, we were into X-Files and the X Factor and the paranormal. We'd try to send messages to each other, telepathically, and little weird things. But I also had a lot of extrasensory experiences, so it wasn't completely strange to me. And he was a very scientific person, so I always wanted to be a parapsychologist and study those things.
What exactly does that mean? What kind of experiences?
Telekinesis or telepathy, or just
How did you experience that?
So just like a lot of, I think it was just intuition, right? A lot of things would happen that I could sense or would. So, for example, because my senses were so open, a lot of things would come into my perception that ordinary people wouldn't notice. And it's not something you talk to people about, like feeling other people's emotions, or even you're hearing someone else's thoughts. It happened a couple of times, and even before things happen, you could see them happening, or you get flashes of things in your mind that happen in reality. But how do you explain that? How do you measure that? And
how did you experience that? Was that something you were it was normal for you, or was it also?
Well, like I said, I didn't have a sense of what was supposed to be normal,
right?
Because I was by myself. I didn't have a range of other people's experiences to.
Right. So you didn't know.
I didn't know what were the. So for us, it was normal because we kind of spoke about these things and explored it, and it didn't seem like something extraordinary to us,
Did you talk about this with your parents?
No, my parents and us, we never really had much conversations. We'd see them for maybe an hour a day when they came home from work and had supper, and they'd go back to sleep. So we were pretty much left on our own, just to explore things and have these weird conversations. And I know we'd, do a lot of crazy things. And then, when it was 4 o'clock, just before my parents come home, we'd clean up the whole house and pretend like nothing happened. So they wouldn't ground us. So like, for example, in exams, we'd always have this one paper which everybody hated, which was the writing paper. So you had to write essays, and it was a creative writing paper. You never knew what topic was going to come out. So I would love it, because the night before, what would happen is, like, I would just get this stream of words and phrases, I could come in my head, and then the next day you could just use that in the paper, and you never knew what kind of story you would write. So that was like really, really fun for me. And I thought it was normal, and I thought a lot of things that I did was normal. Like, even I didn't study because I had a photographic memory. So if I read something for the first time, I would have a picture of that page in my head. And during the exam, if I forgot something, I could just like open the book and, read that page. So I thought everybody was doing that. So I didn't understand why everybody didn't get really high marks in school. Because you don't really talk about these things with other people.
Right. Well, you didn't. And I think a lot of people would have been amazed by that ability, because photographic memory is obviously something very unique and very helpful. I wish I had that. I certainly don't. But when did you discover it was actually not normal? When did you discover that those things are not, things that most people don't have those things?
In school, what would happen, like I said, people would say, if they didn't come out first, they would be in trouble. And I was like, why don't just all of us get 100%? Then we all come out first. And I was like, I couldn't understand why that wouldn't happen. And then when I was about 10 years old, they selected us for this experimental gifted class. And so they only picked like 2 people from each school, and they put us in this program where they taught us about divergent thinking and brainstorming, all kinds of things, which now we call future skills,
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand why they didn't teach everybody that, why they only picked a few people to do that. So my brother and I were in these classes, and even after that program ended, every year I kept being put in these programs. And I thought I couldn't understand why they didn't teach this to everybody, because it was so useful. And I hated school because even though I was good at it, I hated it because it was so structured. You always had to think in a certain way. They always expected certain answers of you. And I just wanted to explore things. I didn't want to sit there in the class. I didn't want to sit and listen to somebody lecture me about stuff that's written in a book. I wanted to do new things in it and solve problems and figure things out and just, bring ideas together. And you couldn't do that in those classes. You could only do that in those gifted programs that we had.
Right. So you were chosen because you had these amazing abilities, because you have a photographic memory, but at the same time, so you were chosen also, you were very creative. You want to be more creative. You want to explore more. You were in the same class as your brother still, right? And this where the period that we're talking about, or was he doing something different? Because you were also saying that you were doing the opposite of what your brother was doing.
He was so they had different grades for these programs. Yeah, so he was also chosen, but I don't know how he experienced it.
Right, but he was chosen for the same class. So you were in this, because how are you? I mean, how old is your brother? What's the age difference?
He's 3 years older than me.
He's 3 years older. Okay, so he was 3 years ahead of you, but he went through the same classes, the same kind of. Was it the same school?
This was in primary school. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So he was about 12, 13.
Okay, and so and then after primary school, where did you go?
Yeah. So in high school, we just went to the local high school up the street in our community. Parents, I wanted to go to a girls' school, a private school in the area. My dad was like, "Nope, you will just go to the same school that we went to, and this is how it is," And I just hated school. I completely, disconnected from what was happening in the classroom. I was good at everything, but I wasn't interested in it. I had a few favorite subjects like physics and computers. I think I interacted more with the computer than I did with anybody else. I
Right.
loved programming, and there, whatever my brother was doing, I was doing the opposite. So here's again, like he was done, geography, and I knew my parents were going to say, what mark did your brother have, and how well did you do? So I deliberately did the opposite and made sure I didn't choose the same subjects that he did. And then my parents were always, I think in that time, every parent wants their kid to be successful. So they want you to either be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. Those are your options for university, right? There's no other option. So my parents, I think my father especially, wanted us to study medicine. And because when he was young, he wanted to be a doctor. But when he was 14 years old, because of the situations they were in, he was taken out of school and made to work. And
Right.
he worked, as a sheet metal worker in a radiator factory, and he hated what they did to him. They took him out of school, they made him work, and he was just a young boy, and that really
Right.
traumatized him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, my brother was a very disciplined child, and he listened. So he ended up studying medicine. And I went my entire life thinking that I was going to be a doctor. But when I got to grade 12 and my brother was already in university studying medicine, it was such trepidation, for me to go in the same path. I couldn't do it. So what happened was I just gave up. I didn't even bother to go through my books, and I wrote my final exams just winging it. And because I knew if I got, all of those A's, I would have to do medicine. I would get accepted and I would be in medical school with him. And that was, I was having panic attacks, just thinking about that my whole life is already laid out for me and this is what I have to do. And I had so many different interests and things that I wanted to explore. So I think the biggest issue to overcome there was disappointing my parents. But once you got over that, it was okay. It was like freedom now. Now I could study whatever I wanted to.
How did you get over that? What happened? So because you basically purposely failed.
Yeah. Well, I didn't fail. I just didn't get.
Well, you
6A.
didn't. Well, at least, it's in the eyes of your parents.
Yeah.
Probably you were like, nah, this is not what happened. So, and they
Yeah.
never asked, like, what you were always doing
If you
so
don't
well.
get an A, it's like you failed. So if getting a B means failure, right? So getting a B was really bad. So that's what happened.
And what happened? Because were they angry? Were they did that?
So I just didn't get into med school. So they were heartbroken. Like, it was like somebody had died in the house. Really like mourning the loss of this child who was supposed to be a doctor. And even till now, I'm like my mom will tell you I screwed up my life. I failed at life. So, but what happened for me, I was, still. So I was free. I was free from this idea that I had to follow this path, and I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. It's like, okay, so I spent all my life thinking I was going to do medicine, and now I have options. What are those options? So, I was really good at computer science, so I enrolled for that, and I went to university. And in my first year, I discovered the internet, and that was far more fascinating than listening to the lecturer talk about maths, and advanced calculus. So I ended up sitting on there just on the internet, just bunking all my classes, and I just ended up quitting university because it was so boring.
Oh boy. I'm just thinking about your parents now.
Yeah, so
not being a doctor, then quitting university. That's a big step.
I was okay with being the disappointment. I consoled myself thinking they had this one golden child who was going to be a doctor, so they should just focus on him, and I could just do whatever I want.
So you had freedom.
Yeah, he bought me my freedom.
Oh.
So,
and you accepted the fact that you would, your parents would be heartbroken because you didn't go to a med school, but that gave you the freedom also to choose your own
Yes.
path and follow your own interests and your own curiosity.
Yep.
So okay, so you stopped your studies at the university, and then what happened?
Yeah. So I always wanted to be a fashion designer because my mom, when we were little, she was at home and she was very creative, cooking and baking and sewing. And while she was doing all these things, I was there 3 years old, sitting on the floor doing the same things. I even had a toy sewing machine, like doing this,
Right.
sewing these outfits for my dolls. And as I grew up, I kept that hobby, and it's something I always wanted to do. But my parents refused to let me study it. They said, you need to have a degree. Only stupid people go to do other stuff. So I had to do a degree, and I had to study this fashion part-time. Um, so I chose to do psychology. It's something I was always interested in. Well, they didn't have parapsychology, but so I just studied
Right.
psychology and English, and those were my majors. And so I was really good at fashion design. So at this time also, I watched one of these, I was watching the Oprah show the one day, and Phil Keoghan was on one of those episodes, and he was talking about his bucket list of 100 things he wanted to do before he died. And after I watched that, I made a list of my own, 100 things I wanted to do, and things I wanted to study and just explore. And I started doing them, and fashion designing, and having writing a book, and studying psychology, and getting my PhD, and having a fashion show in City Hall. So it was 100 things of all these fascinating things I always wanted to do, and I wrote them down, and I started doing them one by one. And so I had my fashion shows in City Hall. I got awards from my designs, and then it just became like, okay, I'm done with this, what next? So it wasn't like I was going to do this forever. It was never about that. It was about the journey. What could I learn along the way? How could I expand myself? And even when I was studying psychology, I had to do this subject called anthropology because it was a prerequisite. So I did just the one module, and when I finished it, it was the most fascinating thing I ever came across in my life. I never heard of it before, but when I did it, I immediately changed my major to anthropology together with psychology, and I completed the second and third years in 1 year because it was so interesting to me.
Why was it so interesting to you?
Because I think, growing up in South Africa, being isolated from other cultures, not even having exposure to other people, and then just learning about all these cultures, all these people, how they think, how they build their societies, how they do things and exist in the world was so fascinating to me. And I really, it was something I really wanted to do. I wanted to be an anthropologist. I think the only thing that stopped me was this participant observation. So if somebody gives you, the eating bugs, you would probably have to do it with them, so not to offend them. So that was the only thing stopping me.
I'm not eating bugs.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was like, maybe I could be a corporate anthropologist.
Okay, but you studied, and so did you finish that study?
Yeah. So I got my degree in that, and then I said, I'm studying all these things, and I'm not going to stop. So just this academic thing was part of my whole life growing up, right? So I'm not going to I didn't think there was ever going to be an end to it. And on my bucket list, I had PhDs, 2 PhDs actually.
Of course.
I was really interested, and I was so inspired by everything I was learning. I just studied things because I was interested by them, just naturally curious about things. So, and I didn't think of going for a specific career or a job. So I thought, what can I actually do with all these things I'm studying? So I decided to become a teacher. I thought it was a half-day job and give me time to do all the other things I was interested in. So I started teaching, and it was really interesting because I was teaching computer science and physics and English, and every year I would teach a different grade or a different subject. So I was always learning something as well. So that was really, I did that for about 9 years. It was very, very good for me also because growing up, I was very isolated. I didn't learn to socialize with other people. I was extremely shy. I would never go up and introduce myself to anyone or even speak to them. And, there were times that people would come home. I would even lock the doors and pretend nobody was home just to avoid social contact. But I guess, teaching kids helped me to learn to speak and, just connect with other people. So that was really interesting for me. And then I got to a stage where I was head of department for physics and IT. And that was, interesting. And the next stage would obviously be deputy principal and principal eventually. But what happened was when I moved to that new position, the school was very violent. And South Africa is an extremely violent place. It's not safe, even in schools. And there were kids running into my class. And one of the kids, and I was teaching a matric class, a grade 12 class. And these kids just ran in and they were hiding from someone else. And I pushed them out. And the kid hit me in the face with a bag full of books. Almost broke my nose. Oh. And I was like, I cannot be here doing all these things and being under such stress. And I need a security guard at my door. So what happened was I said, me standing in front of the class is not going to fix this problem. I'm here to change people's lives, and just, completing the syllabus is not going to do that. I don't know how to fix this problem. I don't know what the situation is, but something more has to be done. So I just took myself out of that situation, and I said, something I could come back to later. I don't know what's the solution. So I ended up going into a software firm, and because I was teaching human-computer interaction and programming and all of those things, just naturally kind of evolved into design and UX work.
All right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So at the time it was just, they were just doing software, but I was teaching kids about how to build, design programs for people, for specific solution, for problems and things. And that wasn't being practiced in real life in an actual software firm. So I kind of developed the design phase in a lot of the places where I worked, where UX was just starting out.
How did you learn about it? I mean, I guess it came quite naturally because of your background and your journey. But when did you specifically kind of learn about things like UX? Was it at the firm? Was it something you were already kind of interested in before?
A lot of things. So it wasn't a thing. There was no such thing as UX when I was doing it. It was just, so I couldn't make up my mind with what to study, right? So I like computer science, but what they were doing in university was a bit boring. So I did the psychology and the anthropology, and I went back to study computer science. And now it was about, human-computer interaction and programming and visual design and all those things. So they were different subjects, but it all kind of converged. I thought we needed to bring them together because that's the only way to answer these problems that we are facing, because the programmers are really good and they love showing off how they can solve complex problems. But the person buying and using that program doesn't care. They don't want to know about it. They just want to see if they can use it. So it's important to have that overview of what's going on, because each person has, a very specific perspective of what they think the solution is. So I always had this global view of what was going on. So I knew we had to bring all these things together. And when I spoke to my boss at the time, and I said, you know what, I want to use my knowledge in psychology and anthropology and computer science and design, and bring them together. And he's like, that's never going to happen.
Oh, really?
He's like, you're nuts. Just decide whether you want to be a front end or a back end programmer.
Right. And when was this?
This was, I think, in 2013. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, 2013. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and I think, I'm a very rebellious person. It's always been with me. It's part of my, from the time I was little, if somebody tells me what to do, it's like, I think it's come out from my attachment behavior. Like, if you don't care about me, don't tell me what to do. If you don't know me, don't tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the best way
Well,
to
and if you tell me to go this direction, I will go the opposite direction.
yeah. If you tell me I can't do something or I'm not allowed to do it, then I'm probably going to do it.
So you thought, well,
Yeah.
I am going to do this.
So like, don't tell me what to do. You can't tell me this is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So
how did you combine these things? Yeah.
So the first time I heard about something called multi-potentiality, it was when I was in university and I was at the library and I saw this book called The Gifted Kid's Survival Guide. And I always was so conflicted about what kind of career path to choose. And they had this section about being interested in multiple things. So I think it was a pretty common thing for gifted kids, where you don't really have only one thing that you're good at. So there was an example of somebody who wanted to study medicine and they were also good at art. So they became a medical illustrator. So it's just looking at creative ways of putting these ideas together, or these subjects together. And we learned all these techniques about creative thinking and these methods when we were 10 years old in that gifted class anyway. So what we did is what I did was think of different ways of putting the psychology and the anthropology and the computer science together. And, what would just keep coming up was some kind of human-computer interaction design or artificial intelligence, and it wasn't really a big thing back then, but it started slowly to develop. So I didn't really specialize. I just kept it open and I just kept learning new things in that area.
But, if I go back to the start of your story, where you are, I think even in primary school, they were teaching about lateral thinking, right? So this is part of, basically how you are wired. You connect things that are not connected and you create something new out of that, right? So for you, it probably was quite a natural thing to do, to say, well, these things, I'm going to connect them, where others are like, no, they're totally disconnected. You should connect those. You're like, yes, that's why I'm going to connect them, because they are disconnected, because that's what lateral thinkers do.
So for me, it's very, very difficult. Like I said, I had a lack of boundaries for everything. So I couldn't see where one thing ended and the other one started. For me, it was just all one mishmash of things. So
when someone tells you about boundaries, you're like, well, what boundaries? What are you talking about? I don't see them. They're not there. What do you mean?
Like, I couldn't understand why everybody also, has this thing about science and religion and this and that. I'm like, it's all one thing, with everything that's happening in life. I have this observer view from really far away, so I can see the whole system and what's going on and how things are connected, and everybody struggles to see where the problems are in the system. But if you have that, overview, you can see exactly what's happening and where things.
That's your pendulum. That's the pendulum. You can disconnect and connect. You can take, you can go swing back basically and look at everything and then go into hyperconnection.
Yes.
Right. So that's something that you've been able to do, or at least you were taught through circumstances as a child.
Yes.
But again, for most people, I guess, that's not something that they are taught or they are able to do. So they find it very difficult to step back and to look at the whole, and then go back into the part where you connect things again. So
I didn't know that though. I thought it was a normal thing.
You keep discovering things like, wait a minute, this is why aren't you doing this? Why is everybody so weird? Okay,
I realize I'm the weird one.
Well, I mean, I don't think weird is the right word for it, but it's just that everyone has their own kind of upbringing and their own everyone has their own defects and their own talents and and it's shaped by where you're from and the context and your DNA and everything. So like you were saying in the beginning, everyone's unique, and so are you. But you were at the firm, so at your company, so you started combining anthropology and psychology and computer science and all that. And so how did that? What happened? What did you?
So you find like you tend to, when you're in this, when you're constantly changing and evolving and downloading new information into yourself, you evolve much faster than things that are happening around you, and you either outgrow the role or the people around you or the situation, and it comes a breaking point where you have to leave. So the company was not ready. So I started the design phase, and South Africa, how it is, right? So when you start something new, everybody's excited about it, like, oh wow, design thinking and this and that. And so what they did, so I was developing this whole solution of how to work better, how to design better software and things, and then they go bring in some person who has no idea what it is, and I have to teach them how to do it so that they can manage me. And they usually bring a white guy in to run the thing and be manager. And I was like, no, this is not right. If he's, and it's a political thing. I mean, it happened for decades. It's not going to change overnight. So I ended up going to another company where they were looking for a UX person who in, education, that kind of thing. So it combined even another thing that I was interested in. So I kept going into different innovation units where new things were happening and they were happy for the change to happen, and they were looking for people who were innovators or were trying new things out. And I think I just kind of fit into that situation where nobody knows exactly what they're looking for or what they wanted to do. They just know they need change. They need somebody who's divergent. They need somebody who's brave to explore and experiment with new ideas. And that's how I ended up in that space. It was just natural to me. And I was comfortable being there, whereas most people are comfortable with things that they already know. But for me, the unknown stuff was more comfortable to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's the, the diversity, the of all your interests and the things you studied and your natural curiosity that, that is so do you see, so that's a specific profile, if you will, that nowadays is something that a lot of companies and people are looking for, because it's exactly what we have been, missing, because we've been educating kids into being experts in one thing, one specific thing, and unable to combine and connect things, and so unable to do the lateral thinking part, and be divergent. And so how did you experience that? I mean, did you come across other people who were like, did you find sort of a tribe, if you will, that you're like, oh, there's other people that are also like me? Because up to now, you've been always the outlier, right?
Yeah. So what I discovered, really, it was very disappointing in corporations where they have these innovation units. Even there, they're looking for people who are designers or who are innovating, but they tell you, innovate in this box. This is
yes.
Innovate, be divergent, do all these things, but do it like this, which is insane. So it's not really innovation. They tell you, this is a product we want to build. Let's see how we can innovate on it. So it's very constrained thinking, and you still have to think along the lines of how the business operates. And if you tell them, what I had a problem with was, so a lot of these things that we were creating, they didn't look at it long term. It was all about how we could get more customers, how we could get more revenue. But for me, looking at the whole system, a lot of the things that we were creating would have negative long-term effects on society. I mean, for example, if you're designing a banking app to get people to take more loans, yes, the bank will benefit out of it, but you're also putting poor people in debt. How does that affect society long term? And there were a lot of issues where I had a problem with, because it would affect the system negatively in the long term, and I couldn't contribute to that. So it was a conflict of interest with my ethics and what I thought was better for humanity, and
Right.
the kind of future that we wanted to create was more, we were contributing to this negative thing, and I couldn't get out of it if I was working in that space. So I had to remove myself from the situation, and I started consulting and doing this kind of work with startups and
As an independent?
social enterprise. Yes.
Yeah.
Working with the people who are working at solving problems for society, like education or things like that. So I didn't want to work with these capitalistic companies that were going to only look at their bottom line at the end of the day. And yes, they have these corporate social responsibility programs and things, but it's not going to undo the damage that they are doing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you got yourself out of that situation, out of a situation again. That seems like a pattern. You put yourself into a situation and then take yourself out of the situation because it disappoints you, or you lose interest, or it's not the right place for you. And so that you took yourself out. You are still independent, right? Or did you put yourself into another situation?
So I've, as I've been working independently, I've come across other people who resonate with us, who are working together to improve society, who are doing things for the good of humanity, who want to create kind of equitable futures that we all deserve. It's not just about let's design, better, more useful products for people to purchase it, So
so you found some like-minded people.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's very hard to find. I work with people all around the world, and in different countries, there are different people that I connect with. So it's without technology that would not be possible. Exactly. I wouldn't have found that where I was if I was working only locally.
Right, because of social media, because of video conferencing platforms, because of all the tools that we have available, you can connect to people around the world and work with them. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you? Can you tell me a little bit about what the things are that you're doing at the moment? So, or in that kind of so with the companies you work for and as a independent consultant, what exactly is it that you do?
So I was doing a lot of UX research. That's what I started doing after I left the corporate. So it was still in the UX space and design thinking and innovation. So when companies, had an idea of some new thing that they wanted to build, it was mostly word of mouth. People would call me up and say, we have this issue we want to explore. We're not really sure what we want to do. Can you help us out? So that's, how it started. And pretty good with that. When you don't really know what you looking for and you don't know how to deal with stuff, I can help you figure that out. So that's where my area of specialization is, dealing with complex, ambiguous things, because it's comfortable to me. So I just help people make sense of things. So a lot of times it starts with an idea for a product or a social enterprise or some problem that needs to be solved. So that's why I went into design thinking in the first place, because when we're looking at in the corporate, it was about a product. We need to build a product for this. But when we're looking at social enterprises or other systematic things that are wrong with the world, like we need to fix the education, like we're working with companies in the Middle East. They were working on education systems, like how to improve it. So these are big problems, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of different moving parts. And it's hard to make sense of. So it's not just also working with one company. It's about working with different stakeholders and trying to figure things out. And then, so I've been working in education technology space for quite a while. And then I ended up working with a team in Malaysia who's now a venture builder, and they're looking at a whole range of different startups. And before we even got to that stage, it was about what areas do we want to look at creating ventures in. And we looked at the economy and how that's built and how that's designed, and just thinking about the future and where that will lead. If we develop just capitalistic startups, it's just going to add to the problems that we're already facing. So we had to redesign this whole system of how we design businesses and what that adds to society and the environment and all those moving parts. So that was really interesting work for me. And that's how the futurism thing kind of coincided with that. So I've been, constantly learning new things, and it just evolved from design thinking to future foresight, where you're looking at the trends, what's happening in the world. And for me, I could always see certain things happening, and you can see the patterns in the system. Now, this is an actual discipline that's based on that, and a lot of it is intuitive. You just have to sense it, and because I'm hypersensitive, it comes pretty easily to me.
Right.
So just to see the patterns, what's happening, and then being able to use that information and make it into something people can also use and make decisions with and design for. So we, even with this COVID thing that's happening, it's not like we are designing a new system with a lot of these things. For me personally, my life hasn't changed. A lot of us working at the edge, not much has changed. We've been working remotely for years. We've been homeschooling. We've been doing all these things. We've been shortening the supply chain. So nothing has really changed. So when it comes to innovation, for example, it's like innovators are energy manipulators. We have to create spaces for energy to flow and move in the system to create new structures. And, from this current social structures that we have into the new ones of the future. So I think there was just a lot of pressure in the system from this black swan moment with this COVID, that it just forced things to move into these channels that were already created. There was already homeschooling, there was already remote learning, there was already remote working.
Right.
It just pushed more of that energy into those spaces.
It speeded up things that were already moving, but they were moving slower, and now it moves faster. So do you think that we are developing these changes or these patterns of these changes, and we are kind of leading that, or are we part of a bigger change, a bigger wave, and we are just sensing it, or some of us are sensing it, and we're trying to cope? And so as a futurist so what I'm maybe asking is, do you think that there's something that it is going to happen anyway, but we have to kind of sense it and feel it, and we cannot really change it, but we have to adapt? Or are we creating the change?
So I think one thing that is happening is that there's a conscious evolution happening. People are stepping into their spaces. I think leadership is about embracing the space that was created for you, and you need to step up in there and embrace your authentic self and just resonate, and that opens up space for other people to do the same. And that awakening is happening exponentially. You can see that much more clearly now than it ever was. And what that does is, so technology is always there, it's always going to be there, it's evolving, and the human consciousness needs to evolve also, because when we combine that, if you combine technology with an unconscious intent, it's going to create negative things in the world. It's going to create a dystopia, because it's going to be fueled by intentions of egocentrism. People are all about power and money and all their unconscious, unmet needs. But if you work on all your issues and you become conscious and you use conscious intent with the technology that we have to create better future for everybody, that's a different outcome. So we always have a choice what kind of things we want to create in the world. So things are evolving, but you have a choice with everything you do by the intention that you make.
So, but it also means that we as societies and as communities, we have to have a common intention, and because we need to collaborate to actually, develop and create that future. And there are multiple futures that are possible, depending on what we decide as a communities, at least, what is the thing that we're starting to believe in, or what is the thing that we want to kind of create. So you could argue, well, there are so many bad ideas out there. And there's good ideas, but how do we know which story is the right story, which future is the right future? How do we, for instance, things just simply happen because there's always this arms race, right? So with technology, who wants artificial intelligence? I'm not really sure, but we're going to get it anyway. Do we really need it as human beings? I don't know. Did we have that discussion as the human race? Did we have that conversation about what is it exactly that we need? No, we don't, because it's just it's like a given. How can we and I totally believe that we can, because we've noticed we can change quite radically everything we do. We can do it if there is a story that we believe in. If we say, yes, we believe in this. But I'm both hopeful, but I'm also a bit like, I'm not sure. Are we able to do so? Because history tells us different things. If you go back into, the history of the human race, Homo sapiens, it's not all good. It's not all good news, right? So are we, and evolution is still going on. We are not the end of the evolution, so where are we going? And I don't know, so help me out.
Okay, so the way I see it, right? So nature is a way the world is created. There's certain natural laws that govern everything. There's certain natural ways for the energy to flow in the system, right? For human beings to evolve, for societies to thrive, for environment to thrive. And what happens is you can either build things that are aligned with that natural flow of energy that will help it to be sustainable and to thrive, or you can do things that are, in the opposite direction, that will cause it to diminish and take away that energy and cause it to be destructive. So, for example, any unconscious intent will create that outcome. Like the capitalistic economy, people wanted in the past, it was all about money and power. Somebody had the intent to create the system where I can make a lot of money out of exploiting some resource or some other people, or subjugating a certain amount of people. It just didn't happen. Somebody had the intent, and that intent was just expanded to others. Other people copy that, and you were not aware of what the outcomes would be. But we know it goes against the natural order of things about, social justice, of equality, of harmony, of respecting nature. Okay, it went all against all of those naturally occurring laws of nature.
Okay, but I'll challenge part of that, like respect for nature. Did human beings ever have respect for nature? I mean, were the consequences of the human race basically not always very negative when you think about, the natural habitat that they...
Yeah, a lot of tribes and communities live, sustainably. They don't exploit things the way it has been in the West. If you look at certain communities where that has happened for, I think, the majority of the world, right? But there are communities that don't do that, where they live in harmony with nature. But for the rest of us, where this has happened, it's about exploiting nature, about taking what you can get and getting the most out of it.
But isn't it also that you just don't know the consequences? I mean, it's not that it didn't happen on purpose. I mean, I don't think anybody on purpose is trying to kind of destroy nature. I mean, in general, I think people are, it's the unconscious consequences of
exactly
what you're doing, right? So
unconscious,
right? It's just that. So this is my worry. That is just basically my worry. My worry is that, how do we know that whatever we do, is the consequences of what we do, although our intent is the right intent, or we think it doesn't, we don't even think about it because we didn't know it would have had that big kind of consequence because we haven't seen it. We couldn't see it. How do we know that what we're doing, it ends up in being the right thing? How do we know? How can we look into the future far enough to say, if we take this path, the consequence of that path will be positive? How do we know?
So, like you said, a lot of these consequences are unconscious intent. We didn't see what was happening, or people didn't see that far ahead. They didn't anticipate what was going to happen because they had very short-term goals. They had very short-term visions of what they wanted to achieve. And it was all about accumulating wealth and subjugating other people and inequality or whatever, right? Whatever systems we have, that's what it's based on. And now you can see the systems no longer fit. In the past, we didn't really have a problem with it because we were as unconscious as the system that we created. But now, when you become conscious, you are aware of what's happening in the system. You can sense what's happening in the future, where the problems are, where the issues are, and what needs to be done to get things going in the right direction. It's not like there's data to tell you this is going to work or that's not going to work. If
Right.
you have data and people are already doing it, you're already too late.
Right. Exactly.
So
as a futurist, how do you then? I mean, I know you say I sense things. I'm with you. I think you have to recognize patterns because you are able to kind of see the whole. Because that's something that is in your ability, but a lot of people won't be able to kind of sense those patterns or see those patterns or feel that energy. But how do you then move forward? How do you make sure that? How do you convince other people of doing so?
So this is the thing, right? When you get to the stage, that's why I said I'm transitioning into futurism, right? So you need to work on your consciousness for you to be able to move forward, because this kind of information is there. It's you can just download it, right? It comes into your consciousness, and if you, it sounds like a little woo-woo and doesn't make any sense, and people think you're a little bit nuts, but once you are online, once you are aware of what's happening, once you've connected, and you've expanded your mind to that level, it's easy to get that information into your brain. It's like tuning into a radio station, and you instantly get that feed. And once you see other people are also getting the same feed, like people like Thomas Hubel and Otto Sharma and Vandana Shiva and Frederick Laloux. I mean, I'm so glad to see that, that they tuned into the same radio station, and I'm not going crazy here, right? And even just to see them converging and working together, it's phenomenal to me, So
is that something a leader should be able to do? Is that a leadership quality?
Exactly, everybody is a leader in their own sphere of influence, whether you're a parent in your community, whether you're a teacher, whatever, level of influence you have in the world, you have to be able to do this work, because you need to be able to make conscious decisions that are in alignment with what is the natural way of doing things, and going back to an ethical way of life and doing what's best for humanity and the planet and society and everything. So it's not just about me anymore. It's not an egocentric way of managing or leading people. It's about this collective consciousness that we all need to be a part of. So it's like a grid of lights, and if one is missing, you can notice it, and everybody fits in somewhere. Nobody else is going to take a place. There's no competition. You have a unique space to fill, and you need to step up into that. And that's what the leadership is about. You stepping up consciously into that space that was created for you and resonating as your authentic self.
Right. Yeah. So I was really happy when I started reading up on things like synchronicity, which basically, is this idea of there's this energy that connects everything. I come from a family of my mother's side being artists and my father's side being more the rational and scientists, and having sort of these two voices in my head, where my mother would more be sensing things and feeling things, and my father would always say, well, if you can't measure it, it's not true. Where all of a sudden quantum physics came along and said, well, there's actually this energy field that we don't know how it works, but it's connecting everything. And so where my mother and traditional Eastern philosophy and most religions say, yeah, duh, we've been saying that for a century. And my father would say, you can measure that. That's also scientific. Whoa, that's amazing. So for me, it was two worlds kind of coming together, where exactly to me, what you're saying, I resonate with that you are, you can be an antenna basically. And this is why we're trying to kind of ask you about that, because that's something I am thinking about when I can sense, I can see patterns, I this, my whole company is based on that idea of there's something going on and I want to stay close. So I need to have something that helps me stay close to that wave. And it's not design thinking, and it's not called UX, and that's not what it is. But there's a wave, and I want to write that wave. And design thinking for me was a nice way to write it, is like to serve the wave, but it's not the wave. And sensing that wave. So I'm more like, can I only write it? Can I also influence it? And I'm hearing you say that you kind of want to also steer, you want to also influence the wave. You want to kind of say, yeah, but we have to kind of steer it that direction because we have to be better people. Yes. And I resonate with a friend of mine who's a expert in artificial intelligence, who said, if we want to have better robots, we have to first become better people. And that's a huge task. Right. So it scares me maybe a little bit. It's like,
I think, this is the hardest work you'd ever have to do. Every human being has this work to do. And for the most part, it was left undone in the past, where you have to. So you have the soul that has this purpose, and collectively that purpose is about protecting life, protecting society, protecting the environment, and just protecting yourself as well. So doing things that are in flow with things that protect, all of these things. And the only way you can tune into that is if you clear out all the things, all these layers of egoism and trauma that has covered your soul. So
how do you do that? So for people who are listening and they're saying, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. And yes, but where do you, because we're so complicated. There's so many things going on in our brains, in our bodies, in our minds. And where do you start? How do you come online? How do you become aware?
It could be an unconscious thing or a conscious thing. Unconsciously, you'll find you'll have the same problems appearing in your life over and over again. And each time it happens, it's an option for you to choose to do the easy thing or the difficult thing. And the difficult thing is doing something new. The easy thing is just carrying on the same pattern you always had. And usually it takes, some kind of drastic event in your life for you to change, where you come to a point where you say, I can't do this anymore. And you have this crisis, the dark night of the soul or something, where you start to awaken and you realize you have to change how you've been living. You move from unconscious to conscious. And the most important work that you have to do is heal your past traumas, self-reflect, and be in a state of constant self-observation and intentional choices. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. I think that's the most important leadership thing that we can never do, is for you to do enough of that self-work to be able to create space on the planet for others to do the same. And it's a very profound thing, and it's not easy. That's why people don't do it. Healing is a very, very difficult thing to do because it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and it's easier to not do it.
I think that's very good advice. I think that specifically the people who are listening to this podcast and myself are very sensitive to that advice, because we do all feel like, yes, we know, because there's this thing that what you're saying is there's such a truth to that, and there's something that we all know, right? So you can do the hard thing or the easy thing. And we all know that, you should do the thing that is hardest to do. And it's easy to escape that. That's a very, such a basic thing of being a human being almost. Is like, I know I should do sports. Why don't I do it? Because it's easier not to do it. But I think that's amazing advice. And I think thank you so much for telling your story, very powerful story, and for your advice. And I thought it was very beautiful to hear sort of where starting from the township as a little girl, growing up the way you did, and then sort of the clear connection to who you are now. And that's such a great example for all of us, I think, to kind of also make that really clear. Like you are this unique person, and you are this, all the things that you went through that make up who you are, and where you're from, and where your family's from. And so thank you for sharing that. I thought it was very, very profound.
Thank you for creating the space for this. I think, this is a really interesting project, and thank you for having me be a part of it.